Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from the Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon user this evening. I'm just going to double check to make sure that we're actually streaming, because we have had some issues in the last little while. Oh, looks like we are good to go. Oh, hold on here, maybe not. Let's see. What's going on. It appears, oh yeah, we're good to go. So, tonight, I am going to talk about a game that, at the time of recording, has just recently come out. But before I do, I want to talk about two different scenes from the novel, or the book version of World War Z. Now, at the time of recording, World War Z probably is best known as a really shitty, big blockbuster kind of zombie film that has a lot of Pepsi placement or product placement, and has Brad Pitt running around and falling into planes and whatnot. That is based on a book that was written by a guy named Max Brooks that basically was sort of like a book version of a found footage movie, in the sense that it was pieced together with in-universe materials, featuring just the history of this fictional zombie war that was fought. The reason I mention it is because there are two significant scenes from the book that actually didn't make it into the movie. One of which is the Battle of Yonkers, which is one of the first major conflicts between the United States Armed Forces and the zombie horde. And the second is the Battle of Hope, which happened about 7 years after the Battle of Yonkers, in the book at least. So the Battle of Yonkers was fought using at the time, conventional weaponry. It was the massed horde of zombies against the massed arms and servicemen and women of the United States Armed Forces, using conventional explosives, using machine guns, using APCs and things like that. And the Battle of Yonkers in the book was a devastating failure on the part of the armed forces, because the tactics they were originally using were intended to sort of like inflict maximum. The types of casualties that it was inflicting didn't matter to zombies. Zombies were it was only really headshots, that really mattered for them. So things that sprayed a huge amount of bullets out and didn't do it with a lot of accuracy, or things that caused shock trauma, didn't really affect the zombies. So it was really ineffective. And also the mop suits and whatnot that the military was wearing were not particularly effective against protecting from bites and so forth. And then 7 years later, after most of North America was overwhelmed with the zombie outbreak, with new tactics and utilizing a different sort of different way of fighting a different kind of war, the armed forces attacked again, this time using tactics specifically designed to defeat zombies. They didn't wear camouflage anymore, because you can't camouflage yourself from a zombie. They used these things called lobos, which were like a combination of like a trencher implement and a giant battle axe. And it was specifically used to sort of decapitate the zombies. They also had bite-resistant clothing on, and to distinguish themselves from the zombies, they were wearing very specific colors as well too. The coolest thing about the Battle of Hope, the first one was the Battle of Yonkers, second one was the Battle of Hope, which was specifically picked. The town itself had very little strategic value, but it was set up because they wanted to have a victory that had the word hope in it. But one of the coolest things about the Battle of Hope was that to both drive the zombies, or draw them towards the armed forces, and also to pump up the morale of the armed forces, the entire time during the battle, they blasted the Iron Maiden song "The Trooper" on repeat. And that's a real shame that battle didn't actually make it into the film, because that would be exceptionally badass to see a bunch of masked people fighting to this 80s Scottish heavy metal band. I have linked, if you're not familiar with The Trooper, I have linked a link to a video with The Trooper in the comment section below, or in the description, I should say, below. So please feel free to click through and enjoy some pump up 80s metal. Now, the reason I mention those two is because the game I'm going to talk about tonight is Band of Blades. And Band of Blades is a brand new, not quite out yet. It's only available in early access in a what the publishers are describing as a quick start. But it's there's so much material in, as we go through this. I think you'll you'll see that there's a ridiculous amount of material in this, quote unquote quick start. Certainly enough to run, a decent sized campaign. I've done, since I picked it up, I've been doing some reading online about the the history of the product and whatnot, and the publishers have been saying that, like, the material that you've got in the early access or digital early access, it should last you for about 10 to 12 sessions, which is, like, in a Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign, that can be your entire campaign. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. There's a great deal of replayability to the game too. So I picked this up earlier this week, and to be honest, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, which is why I'm kind of breaking my normal rules for reviews, which is normally that I want to get the game to the table because, as Matt Colville has said famously, or internet famously at least, that the game is not the meal. Like it's when you really get to see the way a game plays and what the game actually is when you're actually seeing it being played by players. So, but unfortunately, this weekend none of my players are available, so I'm not able to inflict this whim on them. But it's such a cool game. I really wanted to wanted to do a review tonight anyway, and I thought that I would talk about this because it would be, in the past I've had other games where I've gotten into the game very, very early in the game's life cycle, and it's been really, really exciting seeing the game develop. Conan was one of those things. Modifius's Conan, I got in very early with the Kickstarter, and I got to see the game evolve, and that was a really cool process to be part of. So I thought that some other folks might find this an enjoyable process, and it also helps that the Blades in the Dark community is extraordinarily big and involved too. So, anyway, the game that I'm going to talk about tonight is Band of Blades, and this is a Forged in the Dark game that was written by, and I apologize for butchering your name, but it's Straws Adamczyk, I believe, is the guy's name who wrote the game. Let me just double check that. It is sorry, there are two authors. So Straws Asimovich, I'm very sorry if I've butchered your name, and John LaBeouf Little are the two listed authors in it. And it's in a nutshell, what the game is a dark fantasy, military fantasy game. If you are thinking of kind of like a combination of like Band of Brothers and like the HBO show, and like, I don't know, Dark Souls maybe, where there's a very horror and fatalistic, not fatalistic, but there's a very high body count and lethality, to the campaign. The sort of, grinding ruthlessness of war mixed with horror. That's what this game is all about. And it's a Forged in the Dark game, which means that it is based on John Harper's very cool Blades in the Dark role-playing game. So these are special edition, and then this is the edition you can get for print on demand from Drive-Thru RPG. The regular version of Blades in the Dark has this cover, but it's on the harder cardstock. This isn't, as an aside, the version that I actually got through Drive-Thru RPG, because we got a free version of this as long as we paid for shipping. I actually like this softcover version better than the hardcover. I find it a lot easier to tote around. It's a lot easier to flip through, and it's because it's black and white art. You're not really losing, anything in by getting it in the print-on-demand service. So, anyway, what Blades in the Dark is, if you're not familiar, is a game that it's based on the Apocalypse World engine, sort of. I'm actually not particularly familiar with those types of games, like the Apocalypse World and gosh, what are the other ones? I don't remember. There's one about like playing monsters as teenagers. Masks, the Next Generation is another one like that. And I've never really gotten into them. I like reading Masks an awful lot, but Dungeon World is another one as well too. And similar, it wasn't a game that really I couldn't figure out what to do with them until I got into Blades in the Dark. And I got into Blades in the Dark by watching a bunch of YouTube actual plays that John Harper ran for some friends and also his publisher, the guy who runs, Sean Knitter, who runs the Evil Hat game, or company, I should say, that publishes Blades in the Dark and supports the Forged in the Dark program. What Forged in the Dark are is basically games that adapt the mechanics that drive Blades in the Dark, but feature different settings. So there's some, there's one called Scum and Villainy that Straw's actually the author of, one of the authors of Band of Blades. It's kind of like a Star Wars type, thing, playing Scum and Villainy on the edge, or scoundrels and whatnot on kind of the edge of the galaxy type things. Not a direct Star Wars translation, but it is very much Star Wars with kind of the serial numbers filed off. There's also a great one called Copperhead County, where you're playing, if you understand what like Justified or like Breaking Bad is like, that's what that game is about. But in Blades in the Dark, what you're playing is scoundrels who are part of some kind of criminal organization, and it's a sandbox game that is also, because it's a Powered by the Apocalypse influenced game, it is a game that's, the phrase that I've heard a lot is that it's fiction first. And what I take that to mean is that what's happening in the story is really what informs how you interpret the rules. It allows a lot of narrative input from the players, and it's more about finding consensus as the group is collectively telling the story, rather than a DM or something like that dictating a story and then the other players passively following through it. I don't mean that as a negative thing. It's just a different way of approaching the gameplay, and it requires a different mentality as well too. I fell very heavily in love with Blades in the Dark when I first got into it, and I ran it for a bunch of my players. And the only reason I didn't end up running it as an ongoing, I can't remember why I didn't run it as an ongoing game. I was going to run Blades in the Dark as an ongoing game because it really struck me as a very, very cool game. And then we ended up running something different, and I honestly don't remember what it was. But it's been in the back of my mind that I'd like to go back and revisit Blades in the Dark. One of the things, sorry, my dog's pissed off that someone's walking up our house. What I want to talk about tonight is, I don't want to get too much into the particulars of Blades in the Dark. I'd like to just give you an idea of what the rough mechanics are. Broadly speaking, what you do is when you're going to take an action, so it's something that where succeeding or failing has some kind of dramatic impact. If it's something that isn't important, you just kind of hand wave it. To determine whether you're succeeding or failing, or determine the outcome of an action, what you do is you build a dice pool of D6s, and that's based on sort of the narrative of what's going on and what advantages you can kind of draw on, and then what's available to you, what special abilities you have on what's called your playbook. And your playbook is something like one of these here. And what it is like a game sheet that lists what your particular character is able to do, and then as you gain experience, as you play through the game, you can learn special abilities, you can increase your actions, which are effectively like your stats, rather than having like specific stats and then like separate skills and things like that. All your what would be considered, I guess, your skills and your attributes are sort of folded into one thing and in the form of actions. So you have actions that you would take in a Forge in the Dark game. In Band of Blades, those are things like consort, which is consort with connections from your heritage, background, friends, or rivals. Discipline, which is disciplining another soldier. Commanding obedience. Maneuvering into position and traversing obstacles. Marshal, which is to lead a squad of other soldiers. Research, scout, shoot, skirmish, sway, rig, or wreck. And you use those actions, and it's a neat kind of dialogue between the DM and the players to figure out what, how difficult, how many dice are going to end up in your pool. And in addition to sort of building your dice pool too, there is a separate sort of consideration of how how the different factors at play will determine how effective you can be. So one of the examples they give from Blades in the Dark, I was refreshing my memory before the going live just to make sure I remembered the rules correctly. But one of the things they talk about in terms of the effectiveness is, like, imagine your character is the way they scale quality is in tiers in the game. You go from tier 0 up to tier, I believe, 5. And so imagine your character is a tier 1, and then you are also using, and what you're trying to do is pick a lock to get into a house. And you also have what are called fine to lock pools or lock picks. And fine is a quality that means it's one tier, it counts as one tier higher. So you're actually picking locks, but you're picking it at a tier 2. And the thing is that the people who control that building are part of an organization that is a tier 3. Because their quality is greater than you, and you assume that anything that they've got is going to be an equal tier. So it's a tier 3 lock that you're trying to pick. Because of that, it means you're going to be limited in the effect that you can get. You may be able like to only loosen the lock a bit, or you may be able to loosen the lock, but it's going to, it's going to require more effort to try and get the thing open. Something beyond just picking the lock. And that's just really something that you decide in the conversation with your players to determine the effectiveness. And then when you're building your dice pool for that same action, what you would maybe do is, let's see here, the actions available in Blades in the Dark are slightly different from the ones in Band of Blades. But, oh gosh, where is it here? Where is your list of skills or actions? Oh boy. Sorry, I should have actually grabbed a character sheet or a playbook from Blades in the Dark before. Here we go. Okay, so it's probably... Okay, so here's, again, let's give an example of how this could be several different things. Maybe it's Prowl. Maybe Prowl is caught up in that kind of sneaky, like, breaking into stuff as well. Or maybe it's Tinker, which is the action that involves, like, building things and, like, disabling, building, like, engineering devices and stuff like that. Blades in the Dark itself is sort of a, like, early Victorian type setting. Again, I don't want to go too much into it because I would like to do a review of Blades in the Dark at some point. So I guess I'm getting lost in my example here. What I mean to say is, like, let's say that your character, you decide with the DM that it is Tinker, and you've got 2 dots in Tinker. That means you've got 2 dice to start with, and then there are different things you can do to modify that, including if you want to either take stress, and stress is sort of like a expendable resource that you generate, and then if you get too much stress, you suffer what's called trauma, which is like a lasting injury or a lasting consequence. And then if you have that 4 of those traumas, you lose your character. So, spending stress without relieving it can be a problem. You can also take what's called a devil's bargain, and a devil's bargain is sort of like a narrative consequence. There's something that you'll get the extra dice, but there will be some other consequence. And a devil's bargain is something that you can either suggest to the DM, and the DM can say yes, all right, or the DM can just say, you can ask the DM, all right, is there a devil's bargain available here? And a devil's bargain, maybe in the circumstance of the picking a lock, is let's say that the devil's bargain is that you do get the extra dice for the roll, but someone sees you go in. It's not a blue coat. It's not someone who's going to report you to the police right away, but someone knows that you were there, and the DM may not tell you who that is. The reason I want to make sure I mention that is because that's something that carries over into Band of Blades as well too. There's Devil's Bargain, the same mechanics, the same dice pool sort of things. And then what you do is you roll all your dice. Once you know how many dice you've got, you roll them and you look for the highest number that you rolled. And if you happen to roll 2 6s, then that counts as a critical. So if you rolled a 1 to 3, that is generally like a bad result, and there's something negative that's going to happen from that. If you rolled a 4 or 5, then you'll succeed, but it's not going to be without cost. And if you roll a 6, then you generally succeed altogether. In addition, there is another factor, which is your stance. And the stance is sort of like the way, well, maybe I should get the naming wrong. I think it's stance. What it is basically it's how precarious your positioning is when you're trying to attempt these things. I'll give you a little idea. This is a handout that is it's basically the same thing as in Blades in the Dark, but this is in Band of Blades. And you can be in a controlled position where like you've got absolute control over circumstances. You're controlling almost all the factors that are at play. So, you know, you're in a controlled position, and if you fail, you often have an opportunity to try again, just in a more difficult circumstance. Risky is sort of the default position, and then desperate is where you're kind of, it's your Hail Mary position. It's things are really not in your favor. It's you outnumbered. It's you, you know, being ambushed by someone else. It's where, you know, you're trying to convince someone who has hated you for decades. It's a position where success is very unlikely, and even if you do, it may be limited in the degree of your success. The upside to taking making a desperate roll is that you get an XP. You get experience just by virtue of trying in that desperate circumstances. So there is a mechanical benefit to trying to, you know, push your luck and really you know, do something dramatic and desperate. So that's sort of all the different things you're going to play. I'm probably not doing a very good job of making it clear what's going on in the game, but the reason the game itself, like the underlying rules are fairly intuitive once you get into playing them, and it really encourages a lot of discussion about the fiction, about what's happening in the story. You know, well, do you think that your positioning is this, or do you think that I don't know. I mean, like it just like it's very situational, but it encourages you to think about what's happening in the story more so than what's on your page. It definitely makes you think about what's on your character sheet or your playbook, because you've got certain things that can come into play, like your equipment or whatever. But it's in the context of the story, and I really love that. Like the few times that I've run Blades in the Dark, it's been incredibly immersive. It's been I've enjoyed it. My players have really enjoyed it, and they've really got they've really got into the heads of their characters a lot quicker than I've seen in other games, because you're forced to focus on what's happening in the game. It's like the best role-playing moments of any other role-playing game. Just it keeps going and going and going. The game also it bakes in the idea of flashbacks, because they don't want the game. From what I understand, the game is in part a pretty substantial reaction to Shadowrun, where not because of the mechanics of or the complexity of the mechanics of Shadowrun, but because Shadowrun games can often bog down into just planning. And if you're not familiar with Shadowrun, it's a cyberpunk fantasy kind of mashup where you play basically criminals going about and doing jobs. But in practice, what often happens in Shadowrun is you spend a shit ton of your time just planning what you're going to do, what you're, you know, and then as soon as you, as the dice, as your characters start trying to implement that, things go out the fucking window because of a bad decision, or because one of your fellow players decides to go off script and do something crazy, and then suddenly the plan's out the window. Blade sort of assumes that you're going to do that, and that's going to happen, and it gives you the flashback mechanic to fill in sort of the cool and clever things that you can do. And again, that fits for, or that's allowed in Band of Blades as well. So you may have picked up that the game sort of encompasses both a really interesting, or the Forge in the Dark approach has this really interesting kind of like archetypes mechanic that you have, where you pick these very broad sort of types. In Blades, you have broad types like, you know, cutter or leech or spider, you know, that fit broad kind of criminal, you know, archetypes, and then you make those characters your own by choosing your abilities, by, you know, playing up certain traits, and by role playing, you know, and working towards certain things. I'm not going to go into what the other sort of sub mechanics are in Blades in the Dark, because a lot of them are dumped for the purpose of Band of Blades, and that's one of the things that I found really interesting about the game this week, is because it's a lot of the hacks of Blades in the Dark, or a lot of the games that are coming out for Forge in the Dark. And I don't mean this as a slight against them, because the games are all definitely, the ones I mentioned so far at least, are all very much their own thing and very, very cool. But they still are kind of like, you know, criminals involved in some kind of enterprise in just a different setting. Copperhead County happens to take place in this, like, you know, backwoods Kentucky kind of setting, like, again, a very like justified kind of setting. And one thing that I think that from what I understand, that these games are very much, you know, in the same spirit of the Powered by the Apocalypse games, is that they're very clear games about what they're about. You know, all the mechanics of the game are designed to support what the game is about. There's tons of mechanics that benefit and reinforce the themes of Blades in the Dark, and those are things like, you know, feeding your what's it called? Basically it's your addiction. Like each Blades in the Dark character has an addiction that they feed, be it, you know, booze or gambling, or a vice is what they call it, or it could be like esoteric things. You could be wanting to seek out occult, you know, books or relics or things like that. And that's a feature of these playing the damaged characters that you're playing in Blades in the Dark. And there's the organization itself is a separate entity that everybody shares. Everyone shares the play sheet for that, and you sort of agree how to build up your gang. So all those things get you into the game, and those other games I mentioned, Scum and Villainy and Copyright County, they do the same thing. They really help you encapsulate the flavor of that, and they're very different games. Like the Copyright County is a very different game from Blades in the Dark. So when I say that Band of Blades is very different, I don't mean to suggest that those other games aren't very, very well done games. But Band of Blades, wow. Okay, so going to my sort of normal you know, organization for my reviews. What Band of Blades is about is you playing and sort of experiencing two different levels of this doomed conflict against an army of undead. One level is at the battlefield level. It's you playing kind of elite soldiers leading the surviving remnants of the rookies and you know, grunt soldiers who are from this legendary mercenary unit called the Legion. After their most significant historic defeat, being crushed by this massive undead army under the rule of this kind of like fallen demigod called the Cinder King. And the first adventure, like it's set up so that your first adventure is basically on the heels of this massive defeat. And I'll talk a little bit about how those adventures differ. But what the campaign, what the game is about, is you. So I'm sorry. That's one level. It's you at the street level, or the battlefield level. The other level is at the command level, where the players are playing the generals, the quartermasters, like the people who are making the decisions as to where the army itself is going. So you get two different really interesting perspectives, and those are divided into two different phases. The first one is the missions phase, and the second one is the campaign phase. And then in between that, there's also like a camp phase where you can play out these fun sort of vignettes or scenes that happen when you're in the camp between missions and before the campaign starts. And that split between the two different tiers of play is I think maybe the most significant difference between this and other Forged in the Dark games, because you're actually having a really fun intertwined, you know, it's sort of like having two different games that are intertwined with each other and allow them to feed back in. And it gives the players a phenomenal amount of narrative control over what's happening. And in the context of all those decisions that they're making, it's also this incredibly dramatic and exciting story of you having a fighting retreat, of trying to keep your men and women together long enough to get to this place called Skydagger Keep, and then try and make a last stand there. And that's what the campaign is about, is your characters going along, or your all of the characters, I should say, all of them going along with the last survivors of the Legion, grabbing, you know, supplies to keep the army going, grabbing new recruits, dealing with complications and challenges along the way, and then trying to fight off the pursuing armies of the undead. And that's what made me think of those opening scenes from World War Z, is because it just, you know, it features the campaign you're playing through can feature both of those things. They can feature crushing defeats where your tactics just cannot compare against the horrific things that you're fighting, or it can be these amazing dramatic triumphs where you bring to bear exactly the things that you needed in order to defeat your adversaries. And both of those are equally at home in this game. So what you're playing in this is it's the surviving soldiers of the Legion after, again, their most, I think it's called the Eton Fields. It's the place where the most significant defeat of the armies of the mortal armies of mankind have been, have suffered. So that's what you're playing in this game. What you do is you make your way through those two different phases as you try and make your way to Skydagger Keep. So this is the map that, or the region where you're going to suffer. Let's see if the camera will cooperate with me. Come on, camera. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's see if it'll focus. Come on, you. Oh, jeez, uncooperative thing. Do this. Sorry, I tried. Hey, look at that. Maybe we're going to get focus. Boom, look at that. So what you'll see there are hexes on here. And what I understand is that at one point there was going to be like hex movement, but they changed that. In the version that's out right now, what it is basically you track movement. It's called advances. When one of the general level characters decides to advance the Legion and you move from one location to another, you're just moving from one location to another. Now, from what I understand, you're supposed to sort of follow the lines here, but I actually couldn't find anything in the rules that specifically said you had to do that. But I'm assuming that's what those gray lines are for. And what you'll do is, as you play through the campaign, you're going to start on the Western Front. Your first campaign, your first adventure, I should say, starts you just to the east of or west of this, where if the story picks up right after that crushing defeat, you sort of meet up in the Western Front, and from there you start trying to make your way towards the ultimate destination of Skydagger Keep, way over here. As you do that, you pass through a bunch of different places, like there's cities that are under siege by undead, there's cities that are untouched by the undead, there's these primordial forests, there are massive underground caverns through the maw, there are these sweeping roads or paths through the mountains. That's once again screwing up. Come on, camera, work with me. There's a mine that you can go through. So that's the interesting thing about the game, is that or one of the interesting things is that there's a clear path and a clear sort of arc to the story. You want to get to Skydagger Keep, and when you get to Skydagger Keep, that is the final wrap up of the campaign. And it's not like you get there and things are rosy. Like, you get there and what you find out is that Skydagger. Well, I shouldn't. Spoilers for this campaign. So if you do intend to play, maybe what I'll do is I'll not talk about some of the specific story beats of this, but suffice it to say, because I think part of the fun of this game is probably going to be finding out what's happening in each of those missions. There are every one of those locations that I mentioned in the core book that's available as the digital early release. There are at least 3 different missions that are specific to those locations. So, and then there's also specific adventures at Skydagger Keep as well. And the rulebook says, like, you're free to go through that and read it, because in the course of playtesting, they've read through them and play tested them through a lot. But if you're going to be a player and you're going to be a player and not DM it, then I'm going to assume that you're not. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who does intend. But for the DMs who may be listening, who want to run this, there's some incredible and really fun missions that are listed in there, and they give some good ideas as to what this. They give some good insight into what the world is like. I mentioned at the outset, this is sort of like Dark Souls or like Demon Souls, and in the sense that it doesn't. There's some very, very broad strokes of information about what this world is like, but a lot of the stuff as to how things actually work, like there's an action on your what do you call it? A specialty action that's on your playbooks called Weave. And you actually don't really know what that does until you actually read through a lot of the adventures, because there's one mission that tells you when you can make use of that ability. And I love that. I think that's that sort of like allowing you to discover the world through the through the play and through reading through the adventures is pretty cool, especially for a game that's intended to really be improvised an awful lot. You're really encouraged to make the game what you want. So, but one feature that I should mention is that there is, this is, as I said, a dark fantasy and also a military fantasy game. And maybe I'll just refer to what the authors have said. So, what to make clear what the tone is for this, it's dark fantasy because there's horror elements in it. So, where there are dragons and wizards in classic high fantasy, a dark fantasy tends to be closer in look and tone to the real world, with fantasy appearing mostly in the horror elements. That's very much the case in this campaign. Some of the sort of big signature shoutouts or elements of this particular setting, there are no dragons, no elves, no dwarves. It's all about humans, just different ethnicities or cultures of humans. It's an old world. There are ruins and remnants of the past. Magic causes as many problems as it solves. There isn't really like spellcasters or anything like that in here. There are alchemists who are these support people that you can hire for your for your army. It's the quartermaster character can actually hire alchemists or press gang them, I guess, to working for you. But working alchemy is a corrupting effect. It causes the characters to basically become evil and tainted and whatnot. So none of the player characters or none of the playbooks allow you to actually craft alchemy stuff. There's no wizards. Alchemy is a science. One thing, like there's a lot of very amazing things you can do with alchemy, like making eyes that can let you see the invisible, or bombs, or things like that. But it's all got to come from using that thing. There isn't anything that lets you kill someone with a curse over a long distance. And similarly too, the undead in this, they cannot just there's a limit on the undead as well too. They sort of have to have any kind of organization to them. They have to have powerful undead minds near them to sort of control them, the sub-lieutenants of that Cinder King. Prayer does nothing. There are certainly gods in this, and the way that gods manifest themselves in the world is they infuse some of their power into mortals who become their chosen. And these chosen have a lot of really powerful abilities, and they do have a fairly significant influence on the people and people around them and people who follow them. But what has happened is that the Cinder King has broken some of these chosen and twisted them to follow his end. So his generals in his army are actually kind of like twisted versions of demigods. They're broken. They have been warped by his magic or his power. Even his power seems to come from an artifact called, I think it's the Fire Crown or something like that. Anyway, it's this very powerful artifact, and that seems to be what granted the Cinder King his power. If I'm wrong about that, and someone is who's more up on the lore, please feel free to correct me in the comment section. But that's the way that the gods influence themselves. And the reason that's important to know for the game is because your army is effectively not led, but is associated with one chosen. There's one chosen who is allied with you, but the chosen are not humans. They're not bound by like mortal principles or standards of conduct. Like they're presented as very powerful but very alien kind of beings. They're way more powerful than the average soldier or even the specialized troops that you would play in the campaign too. But your choice of which of the three chosen that you choose to have feature in your campaign for your army has a huge effect on the campaign itself. Not only on the influence they have over the campaign and the abilities that they grant, but also their opening adventure. The opening adventure for each of the three chosen that are featured in the quick start, they each have a different starting point, a different story. There is no prophecy. Nothing is written, nothing is preordained. There are no words carved into stones that say what will be. There's no fate. You can make your own destiny. There's no chosen one protected by plot. Anyone can die. This also does not stop people from believing otherwise. So that's cool. I mean, like, it gives it sort of a historic or like kind of a Game of Thrones type feel to it, where there are certain people that feel that the gods meddle in affairs and make them happen one way or the other, but objective evidence might suggest that that's just not the case. The gods do manifest their will through the chosen, but they can't control fate. They can't control the outcome of the world, which means that the success or your efforts to save the Western kingdoms, which is sort of where the army is marching towards. And if you don't secure Skydagger Keep, they'll march and run roughshod over the Western kingdom. So your, ragtag group is the last best hope for the world, the lands of men and women. And that's really cool. That's a cool sort of heroic, but also gritty, feel to it. And the name, obviously, Band of Blades, comes from either the famous speech from Henry VIII, I believe, the what do you call it? It's the oh boy, Saint Crispin's Day speech from that play. And it's also where the HBO series gets its name, from the Band of Brothers. And it's Band of Blades. It's all about the camaraderie, or the game is all about the camaraderie between your soldiers, the horrible toll that war takes on your characters, both psychologically, but also metaphysically and supernaturally in this, because the undead can actually corrupt your characters as well too. So I can see that, like, over the course of a campaign, you can see characters die, you can see them replaced by new rookies who, we don't know anything about, or brand new, don't have that wealth of experience, that and shared struggle that the other soldiers went through. Yeah, so that's there isn't any like automatic guaranteed get out of free thing. The forces that you may face in the course of the campaign do not, there's no guarantee that they're balanced. And in particular, because you're sort of fighting a retreating action, it's very rare that you're necessarily going to want to just directly fight these things head on. Your army tried that and lost horribly before the story actually began. So while you may be facing phenomenally powerful enemies, you're focusing on the goal rather than just downing these things in a lot of cases. And that's awesome. I mean, that's sort of, in a very similar way, that's what the advice has always been, to try and make other types of, like Pathfinder or D&D, to make those kinds of combat encounters interesting, is to give them goals. So in these, while there is a tactical and combat element to pretty much everything you're doing on your missions, it's all goal-oriented, which means it's not just a grinding through of specific encounters. It also encourages you to really maintain whatever's been established in the fiction and build on what comes before. So it means that those missions progressively building on each, off of each different individual phase. When you go through the mission phase and then back to the campaign, and then from campaign back to missions again, it means that you're building up a relationship with your adversaries, you're building up a relationship between your characters, and you're seeing your whole army sort of rise, the fortunes of it rise and fall as you go through the game. So that's hopefully a good, like, rough overview of what what the sort of the whole game encompasses. I want to quickly go through some of the finer points in here, just so you get an idea of what what you're actually doing in the game. So when you are sitting down to play Band of Blades, there's a couple of different decisions that you're going to make. The recommendation is that it be for 4 people. So at the minimum, 1 DM or GM, as they call the game, and 3 players. It can accommodate up to about 5 players, and in theory, I don't see why you couldn't incorporate as many players as you want. It just means that, well, I don't know, there's really no reason. The game as written, or at least the quick start, it's really set up so between 3 players and a GM, and 5 players and a GM. What you will pick is each of the players will pick at least one of the roles. There's a difference between the roles and the playbook. So the role is the general level, like the command level of your army. The 3 roles that are available are the marshal, the commander, and the quartermaster. And I've got these the bigger ones printed in black and white, but I will show you what the color version looks like, because it's cleverly color coded. So sitting in front of you, you can make an easy distinction between which is your playbook for your soldier, or your specialist, they call it, your specialist, and which is for your role for the general. The playbooks have this very nice red excuse me, banner, and the roles have a kind of baby blue banner. And each of the playbooks is about the same size. Well, not about, it is the same size. It's 2 pages. And it folds quite nicely into these little booklet things. And on the front of each of the roles, the three roles, as I said, are the marshal, who's kind of like the person who sends the armies out or the squads out to do the different missions. They're also the one who determines what sort of what the circumstances are as that mission starts. It's something called the engagement role, which is also in what do you call it? Blades in the Dark. And what it does is it sets up like the sort of the position that you're in, whether you're controlled, risky, or desperate as you're going in. And then there's a bunch of different factors that can play into there. One of the very, very cool things about the 3 necessary roles is that there's a great deal of interaction between these different characters, which I imagine it requires a lot of discussion at the table. You've got the commander, who is sort of like the high-level, soldier, not soldier, the general, and the types of things he or she tracks is, depending on how much intel, which is an asset you can gather, depending on how much intel they're holding, they can ask a number of questions about potential missions. So the commander is the one who's figuring out who asks the GM what missions are available, determines one type of mission that they really want to focus on. And those types are an assault, which is like a raid, an ambush, or an attack. Scout, which is infiltration, patrols, or surveys. Religious, which is like a pilgrimage or rituals. Or supply, which is scrounging or mercenary work. And the missions that are available is dictated by what location you're in. And that's very handily described on the back of the commander sheet. That map I showed you earlier is actually on the back of the commander sheet, because the commander is the one who dictates when the army moves. When it's time to pick up and make it to the next destination, that's where you make your determination. And there are certain things that you have to, you certainly have to coordinate with your other fellows, like the quartermaster, because if you don't have, say, enough carts, supply carts, then when you pick up and move, you may have to leave a bunch of shit behind because you just don't have enough enough ways of transporting it. If you don't have enough horses, you may be forced to suffer what's called the what is it here? It is the pressure. And what happens is the pressure is sort of like an abstract management of the undead hordes getting closer and getting in on you. So when you leave, you and the commander and the quartermaster and the marshal have to sort of decide, all right, like, are we making a run for the next destination here now? Or is it better for us to hunker down and build up some more resources, get some carts, get some, try and hold out or grab resources with some supply run, missions, and see what happens. The decision of any of these characters or any of the roles is really interrelated, which I think is going to make for a really great conversation at the table. The commander wanting to know what, trying to find some information about the missions, the marshal making a decision as to who's going to be sent on it, the quartermaster making a decision as to whether they're going to spend some of the army's or legion's resources to try and help the people on that mission or not. Those decisions are made during the campaign phase. The campaign phase is when we go to the high level. There are also 2 optional roles that can be played. One of them is the spy master, and the other is the lore keeper. The lore keeper is a really interesting one. I'm not quite sure what it is sort of another way of recovering resources, but it also allows one of the players to really but to take control of some of the narrative aspects of what's going on in the camp. And it also gives a player who really likes telling stories or role playing, or really like a world building type player, to start adding a bunch of cool backstory to what the Legion is about. And the Spy Master is a really interesting resource where you can not only you're balancing resources as well, but It's in the spies you have in your employ who you're sending out to different destinations, or trying to get information on missions, or working on long-term goals, which can include things like building up your spy network, as you're trying to make your army go along. They aren't quite as key to the playing of the game as what the quartermaster, the commander, and the marshal are, but they're certainly at an interesting aspect to them. But the three key roles, though, it is so cool how much interaction there is between the different characters, and I really am looking forward to seeing how that plays at the table. The quartermaster dictates what the army does for downtime activities too. Do they want to? What are they going to spend their time doing, like when they're between missions? And these can be things like, are they going to rest and recuperate, which like try and heal up if your soldiers are getting hurt during the missions? Do we just like try and chill out and relax? Do you have liberty, which is to boost the morale? Because another thing you track is the overall morale of your characters. So as you're going along certain missions, if you succeed in the mission, your morale might go up. As people, heroically come back and everyone's in camp and celebrating, or that horrible thing where everyone comes back and all the specials are down and injured, and it drives down the morale of everybody in camp. Or are you going to acquire assets? Do you need to go and get some stuff? Do you need to hire some more alchemists? There's a thing called a mercy, and what a mercy is sort of like someone who's been blessed with the power of one specific goddess. And what these people can do is basically bring the wounds into themselves. So if someone's injured, they can transfer the wounds into themselves. So it's a cool way of providing like a healing mechanic without really breaking the dark and like everything at a cost sensibility for the setting. You can recruit, so like, are we going to get some more troops? So we can try and pick up some stragglers from either the Legion or from other militaries, or there's some local boys and girls who want to, fight for the good fight, or some other kind of long-term project, like something else that you decided to, to work on narratively, like constructing siege engines, or like, I don't know, like setting up roadblocks or whatever, like, flooding a valley. Whatever kind of neat thing that you choose to add that that the GM agrees would be appropriate for a long-term project. One thing I should finally mention as well too is that Blades in the Dark and Forged in the Dark games make extensive use of something called a clock. And what a clock is a really clever way of tracking progress. And I believe that the idea of clocks was taken from some other game. I just don't know what it is. That's what your kind of clocks look like there. They could be like a 6-tick clock, or a 8, I think, tick clock, 4, whatever. And what you do is, as progress is made on these things, you fill in sections of the clock, which gets you closer to to completing it. And those things are just, it's by agreement between the players and the GM as to how many ticks that are required or how many boxes are required before things are completed. And it's another example of kind of the cool informal mechanics that come with Forged in the Dark games that just get you, kind of give you a game mechanic to work around, but not take you out of the fiction too much. Let's see, what else does a marshal do? So every campaign phase, what you'll be deciding is which 2 missions you're going to undertake. You will always have 3 missions. Well, not always. You'll hopefully have usually 3 missions, but sometimes you only have 2, and you undertake 2 of them. One of them is your primary mission, where you actually play through it. Like you go down to you zoom down to the battlefield level, and you play through that using your actual characters and the squads. The other one is just done through a sort of like, you make a roll based on certain circumstances and whatnot, and the outcome of that roll tells you how that mission went. But what it means as well is that when there are 3 missions that are available, you may suffer the penalties of not doing one of them, because some missions, and in fact I think a lot of missions, come with consequences. You don't, if you've got 3 different available things you can deal with and you only deal with 2 of them, that other third thing could potentially cause problems for you. So that reinforces the sort of like limited resources aspect of this desperate flight from the edge of a failed battle or a massive battlefield defeat, and trying to flee for this for your lives, to take refuge and try and drive off the armies in Skydagger Keep. So That's what the one level, the high level, is at the role. And then you get to personalize each of your characters who are in the role as well too. You give them names, you give them some traits, and so forth. And then each of the different roles also has some other resources to manage, which means that there's plenty of game to play. You know, there's plenty of interesting tactical decisions to make in terms of the characters that spills over into the narrative as well. Then what you're going to do as well when you're starting the campaign, in addition to figuring out who's playing those different roles, each of the players will pick at least one playbook. And the playbooks are, as I said, it's very much like in Blades in the Dark, where they are archetypes. They're sort of like broad archetypes that you can then specialize how you want. The playbooks in Band of Blades are heavy, which is like the massive, heavily armored, shield wielding, big weapon wielding tank type character. There's the medic, which is, I think, pretty self-evident. There's the scout. There is the sniper, who's like a deadly wielder of firearms. It's called sniper, but it doesn't necessarily mean you use a rifle. You can actually use paired pistols and just be like a really deadly, up-close sharpshooter. There's the officer. And then those are what are called the specialists. The specialists are like the elite of the elite. They're really the hero, kind of characters. And then the squads you've got are made up initially of rookies, another playbook. And what rookies are is that kind of like fresh-faced kid who's just showed up in the army, and their stats are kind of crap, but they've got some really interesting abilities that that support that kind of like the lucky first shot, or like how the kid sort of can run through a hail of gunfire and still manage to survive, and then go on to become a bigger hero. The rookies over the course of play can upgrade to becoming soldiers, and then soldiers can eventually upgrade to becoming specialists. And another thing I did not mention about the Forge in the Dark games is that the XP process, or the process of gaining. All right, Andy. Oop. We got lots of background barking here, so sorry. The other thing that is a signature of the Forge in the Dark games is that the XP system is very transparent. It's clear how you gain XP in the game because it tells you right on your playbook what you need to do to gain XP. And then the way that you tally your XP is not like a judgment call by a DM. You go to the end of the session, and then everyone has a conversation, and you go through what you should have done to gain XP. So just as an example, the officer, let's see here. Every time you use a desperate action, like I mentioned before, you get an XP in that action's attribute. And the attribute is one of the big things on the side here. So these big guys here, resolve, prowess, and insight. You just fill in a little tick for each XP point you get. The way you know what your attribute rank is scored at is you total up how many of these actions beneath there you've got. So this character, the officer, starts with a resolve of 2, a prowess of 0, and an insight of 1. And there are ways to modify that, but primarily what the attributes are used for is resisting things. There's no hit point mechanic in any of the Forge in the Dark games. Instead, what you do is there are consequences, or there are harms that you can befall. So harms can come in Band of Blades can go from like level or rank 1 harm, which is like like frostbite. If you slept out in the mountains for one night and you did not have appropriate clothing, you're going to get a level 1 harm. And the way you track that on your character is you fill it in right in your playbook here. There's your harm, and then as a result, you just write it in there, frostbite, or however you want to describe it. It could be like a nicked ear or something like that. That's rank 1, and then the consequence is it lessens the effect that you get. Then at rank 2, you take -1 dice to all dice pools. And then at rank 3, you need help. You cannot function on your own. Someone needs to help you go along. You'll see the little ticks there. That's for when you're healing. That's how many like kind of rest actions or rest campaign times it takes before those harms will go away. If you take a rank 4 or 5 harm, you die. You're just dead. There are ways to reduce the harm through resistance rolls where you say, nah, I resist it. And depending on how serious the harm is, it may reduce it by 1 rank, or it may, erase it altogether. And that's a decision that really the DM can make, or the players in the DM, I guess, can say, look, do we allow harm to be erased altogether, or with a resistance, or do we just reduce it? This game, given the tone of the sort of like bleak nature of Battlefield, like actual war that they're trying to play up, I imagine it's just only resistance. You would never be able to get just erase it altogether. There are other things like using armor or using shields that can reduce harm as well, but anyway, that's one thing to track. So looking back, to the XP system, I'm looking at this thing the question I asked, if you survive the mission, you get 1 XP, and that's just general XP that goes on your clock at the top there. Oops, there it is. You ask whether if you helped your squad through enforcing discipline or strategic planning. So that's something specific to the officer, and you get that. If you brought into play your heritage or your traumas. I mentioned earlier that you'll gain traumas if your stress maxes out. The downside is if you get 4 traumas, you lose your character. The upside is as you get traumas, you can play them up, and you can get XP for that. So that's things like traumas in this game are things like cold, or haunted, or obsessed, or paranoid, or reckless, or soft, unstable, or vicious. And that gives you a mechanical reason to play your character sort of believably, something that suits the story. If your character is shell-shocked or suffering from the equivalent of post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're throwing yourself into combat without a second thought, it's maybe because your character is so traumatized, and so if you've done that and that fits your character, it makes for a much better and more interesting story. And it provides you an opportunity to get XP, because you read the question, if you can say yes, you get XP. And finally, you get XP for your highest threat of opponent faced. That's different from other Forge in the Dark games as well, too, because this one, you can face some really massively powerful adversaries in it. So, and then for each of the different playbooks, that's it's a different way of going through your list and getting XP. So those are the playbooks that are available. There's nothing hard and fast saying that you cannot pick. That there can't be overlap. It's not restricted to having just one. But certain types of missions require at least one of some of the playbooks. So, for instance, let me go to the Game Master one here. So, for instance, if you are doing an assault mission, you need to have at least a heavy, a medic, or a sniper along with you. The other neat thing, so when you're playing the game, the reason I say that there are 5 maximums, because when you're initially making your character, your group, once everyone's picked their role, let's say you've got only 3 players and 1 DM. So that's the bare minimum. You've got 1 person playing quartermaster, 1 person playing marshal, 1 person playing commander. And then the players pick their playbooks for their characters. So they pick, a sniper, a officer, and heavy. Then what the marshal does is marshal picks, I believe it's the marshal, picks 2 other characters. So you got a minimum of 5 to start with. So you start with 5 specialists. And then you also start with, I believe it's 1 or 2 squads. And squads are just basically a group of 5 rookies. And they count as tier 1. So they can interact with the game to help out other players or help out the kind of like the PCs. It also means you can change characters as well, too. When you are sending your specialists along on missions, I believe it's a minimum of 2 that have to go along for any individual mission, which means to start with, you're going to have to split up your group to get things going. Now, you may be asking, okay, well, if you've got 3 players, and let's say I send, one of the characters that this player made off on the secondary mission, what the hell am I going to play in the primary mission this time? Well, that's where you just grab a rookie. And what it's recommended you do is you have a bunch of these rookie and soldier playbooks kicking around, so that if someone's going to, someone picks up and is going to put a name to a rookie, they just grab it and they go through, and it's very, very quick to make characters. You pick what you do is you pick a starting ability. So you pick one of the abilities listed here, and they say if you're having a hard time picking, just grab the top one. That's very easy to go through. Pick a starting heritage. What culture are you from? And then once you do, pick 2 traits. Give yourself a name from that culture, which is again listed right on the playbook. Assign 4 more action points. So you get to fill in 4 more dots here, and then report for duty. So then this character shows up, and it's kind of like, you know, I've recently binged watched my way through both Band of Brothers and the Pacific, so I really kind of was primed for this game beforehand. But it's kind of like, you know, those episodes where this, you know, someone arrives after, you know, the massive siege. You know, there was I don't remember the name of the island because I wasn't paying close attention, but there's one massive, you know, first island battle that happens in the Pacific. And then once they've taken that island, they go to the next one. And Peleliu, I think is the second island. I can't remember the name of the first one. The soldiers who were showing up and fighting at Peleliu were really resented originally by the other soldiers, because they're like, fuck you, you weren't here for the real hardship, you know, at that first island. And that's what you're playing the rookie, is this chump, you know, kid who doesn't know any better. And that's fun. So then you've also got you've got a name to go with. And you actually probably, I know, you know, actually I think I'm wrong about that. You wouldn't actually give a name to it, because when the marshal, the person who's playing the role of the marshal, makes the character or selects it, one of the first things they need to do is, you'll see these lists here. So there's different squads, like the Ember Wolves or the Shattered Lions, you know. And what you do is you fill in names for each of the squad members, so you kind of know who these characters are, at least by their names, who are the squad members, and you can see them take injuries and whatnot if they're not actual, you know, if they don't have a playbook. Or what you do is, you know, you grab one of those squad members and they suddenly become the rookie you're playing, and then the rookie can gain, you know, XP as well. Rookies gain XP for surviving the mission. If you helped your squad by staying out of the way and surviving despite the odds, if you brought into play your heritage or traumas, and then per the highest threat of the opponent faced. If they survive, they become soldiers, which is kind of like the transition from the green, you know, grunt up into the soldier. So you could see over the course of the whole campaign, you could see these characters who are pressed into action where the, you know, one of the heroes died, then going over, you know, evolving over the course of the campaign and becoming one of these specialists, you know, and becoming one of these heroes. And because there's no plot immunity for the characters, that you could also see that character die or become corrupted over the course of the campaign. And because the game is so story focused and narrative focused, and not as much focused on the individual characters, I think that would be an easier pill to swallow than just seeing your characters die in a lot of other games. You know, because again, the focus is, it's fiction first gaming. So the focus for everyone is on telling the best story, and if the best story happens to be that, you know, we see our hero die, you know, it's Captain Quint getting eaten by Jaws at the you know, in the third act of Jaws, and seeing this character who we thought was invulnerable, oh, he's dying, you know, that's a great dramatic moment. So that's what you're playing at the battlefield level in the missions phase. I mentioned that one of the roles that is picked, someone's got to be a game master. Well, the game master gets his or her own workbook too. And what their workbook does is, you know, tell us what the game structure is, or not workbook, the playbook. It has all the cool rules for generating random missions. I mentioned before that there are, in each location, there are different missions you can undertake. Well, there are also a crap ton of those specialist missions. You need to either spend intelligence resources. The commander needs to spend either intel resources to locate those things, or they need to be one of the 3 missions that are randomly generated as being available for you. One other thing I'll mention as well too, before I move off of the roles, is that there is this progression that is also tracked by the commander. And what this is the onslaught. It's progression towards when they're overwhelmed by the undead army. This is the timing. So when you, after each campaign phase, as you go back to the missions, you tick off one more time. You know, time progresses along. There are different missions that can give you resources to reduce the time. So it's basically buying yourself time. You're stalling the onslaught of the undead armies. But every time one of these things fills, there's two things that happen. One, summer ends, and then it goes into fall. And then as this one is filled, fall ends, and it goes into winter. And as you're marching up to Skydagger Keep, you know, ideally, I think it's that you're doing it through the snows of winter. But the other thing that happens is every time you fill in one of these things, the undead army gets more powerful. There's more abilities that are unlocked for your adversaries, because it's not just the players who get to have fun in choosing what the game is going to be about. I mentioned that the players make a decision as to which of the three chosen are linked to their army. Well, the DM gets to make a very cool choice as well, because they choose which two of the broken are chasing them. And the three that are available in the quick start are the Blighter, which is this fallen chosen, who's sort of like she is kind of like an evil, mad scientist kind of type character. And then another is the Breaker, who is like a storm sorceress. It's a pretty cool picture there. And then the final one, there is no picture for it yet, but my absolute favorite, the Render, which is short for the Bone Render. And the Bone Render is basically like your giant Lord Soth, undead, corrupted knight type character. He's described as having this giant black armor with a face that has a still burning handprint from where the Cinder King grasped his face and corrupted him or broke him. And what you do is you pick these two of these things, and then each of the broken has different abilities on them. So you can see, just like the playbooks and for the characters, the broken each has its own special ability. And then every time that one of those big pies is filled on the time tracker, they get a new ability. So some new horrible way to make life hell for the players. In addition, each of the different broken has a very different army that serves them. And they also each sort of play to a different kind of horror. That's not quite hard and fast in this, but it seems to be that's what they're going for. So for instance, the Blighter, they say, is really, it's body horror that the theme is they're trying to go for. So a surgery, science gone wrong, toxic gases, and the horror of trench warfare, troops oozing pus and disease, bodies knitted together in disturbing ways. That's what the Blighter, is all about. In comparison, the Render is all about brutal simplicity, overwhelming force, hunger for blood, the unstoppable tide of undead, metal and smoke and fire and soot, the depersonalization of war, totalitarianism and rigidry. And I imagine that the fiction in the game, or the backstory in the game, talks about there being other broken as well too. So I imagine that either in the full game or in supplements, they will expand the types of broken that are available for use by the DM. But it's great, and then each of them also has different followers too. So like the followers, I should say, play up to their themes. So for instance, the Blighter has things like its frontline troops are things like Rotters, which are undead burning with hate for the living. The corpses continue to rot even as dark sorcery compels them into battle. The corpses have, let's see here, they're basically like undead bodies full of plagues and toxins, so they're really dangerous to fight as well. Another one is the Crows, which are kind of like plague doctors with those big goofy masks and whatnot. And then they're more serious or more threatening things are like the Black Rotting Gale, the Abomination, a joint venture of Victor and Blighter. This horror exchange raw size for tubes and tanks of alchemicals. As it walks, it vents a cloud that's toxic to all organic matter. It yearns to deprive the land of all natural life. That's one of the lieutenants for the Blighter. And they give you 4 different ranks of threat for each of these. So like frontline troops that can be disposed of in sort of big swaths, to leader, kind of like sub-boss type characters, to lieutenants, which they describe as, some of you will die, good luck. Rank 3 is, you need to plan, friends, and some good equipment. Rank 2 is a dangerous fight, bring friends. And threat 1 is, well-equipped soldiers can fight a few of these. And you know, by comparison, the render has like, you know, soldiers or knights that are basically corpses, hollow corpses that are full of burning black flame with red armor on them, you know, or hounds, which are actually one of the crazy evocative. Hounds were once people, now with eyes sewn shut, lips ripped off, teeth filed to points, and chains attached to their ribs, spines, or collarbones. They smell the breath of the living. Holding your breath can help you hide. And most elites in Render's army hold a few on a leash to help find any escaped enemies, rewarding a good hunt with a limb of the hunted to feast on. So you kind of, you know, the images that come to mind of these like massive armored knights on, you know, astride these giant black destriers with you know, a brace of these hounds at, you know, on chains with them is just, it's very fucking cool. Like, it's very evocative. One of the things I should say too is it's not just gross. So they're conscious of the fact that you know, some people may have thresholds for a lot of this stuff, and they really encourage you to make use of that kind of, like, I think it's called Rule X for some groups. My groups generally are pretty resilient. So that implies that you're not resilient. We don't have the same kind of triggers that some groups might. But they do encourage that if, you know, they want you to push the gross and the horror to the point that everyone's comfortable with, but if it goes beyond that, to have a mechanism in place so that you can do the, like, kind of like X rule or whatever of saying, I don't want this in my game. So that, I think that's quite good, in particular for a game that's so involved, so involves all the players in the narrative. It's nice to see that they've recognized that some players may not be comfortable with all the different elements that all the different people playing might want to bring into the game. So, and then I mentioned as well too that you can make the choice of your chosen as well, and that is the final thing that you pick. And I'm trying to find where the heck. Oh, here we go. The chosen, because I don't have them color coded. The three they give you in the quick start are Zora, the Horned One, and Alana. And I don't want to go too much. They've only got the picture of Alana in here, but it's worth saying that each of them has a different starting mission. And I don't want to spoil that for the people who might play. It is the DM who picks which chosen, but the chosen, just like the broken, they have special abilities as well, and it's the players who get to pick what special ability they have. Of the ones that are offered here, I liked I like the story with Alana the best, the starting one, because it fits with the whole sort of hopelessness thing. But again, I won't spoil that for people who might want to actually just play this and enjoy the game, because it's a pretty cool, epic opening. Another handy thing that you get with the playbooks is a nice handout to give to all the players, which gives you the basics of you know, quick reference for resistance rolls, for how armor works, how group actions work, the action roll, so everyone's can judge their own risk and whatnot accordingly, and then a list of all the equipment and what it does that you may find on your character sheet. An idea that I understand that Blades in the Dark stole from, not stole, but, you know, took from Dungeon World, is the idea of retroactive equipment. What you can see on each of your playbooks is a list of different equipment, and then what you do, rather than picking out your stuff ahead of time and whatnot, you go through and you pick what load, like how much crap are you carrying? Are you lightly encumbered? Are you normally encumbered? Or heavily encumbered? And this just really is another one of those things that plays into the fiction. So if your character is heavily encumbered, that means anything that is normally or light encumbered, they're going to catch you. So a heavily encumbered heavy, say, cannot run away from some lightly encumbered hounds. But what you do is you just pick one of these things, and then it tells you what you've got and how many other things you can kind of pick. So I like that, because and then you don't need to pick ahead of time what you know, what you've picked. You can reveal over the course of the campaign or course of the mission, and that's great, because I mean, like, it you know, it gets around the, oh fuck, I should have brought a ladder, oh I should have brought a 10-foot pole kind of thing. You can just, it does provide a way of limiting just how much crap you have access to, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't make you waste a lot of time planning and buying all the crap with the, you know, and getting around the issue of like where you bought a bunch of crap that you thought would be useful but really wasn't or never came into play. It tries to keep everything exciting and moving, just like it does in Blades in the Dark as well too. So that's what the game is about. That's what characters you're playing in there. I've talked about the mechanics of it. Putting it all together, as you kind of have likely picked up, it's a difficult game to review because there's so many different interlocking and moving parts in the game. It's hard to know where to start with to talk about the whole game. But the way it all sort of works together is all those things work together to support this really interesting story of these desperate soldiers and this desperate army trying to make its way back to a safe location to try and prevent their what happened to their army happening to the rest of the lands of the men. All right, Emmy. Hey. Yeah, well, sorry. The weather is very nice at the time of recording, which means there's lots of people on the street, and my dog loves saying "fuck you" to everyone who walks by. So that is unfortunately the sound you hear in the background. So that's really what the game is in a nutshell. And as I said, like for me, the reason this hit such a sweet spot is lately I've been wanting to find ways to get more of the focus at my table into the actual story. I've been running Traveler for the last couple of months now, and that's been great. Like because there's not a lot of stuff on your character sheet. You spend more time in the fiction than looking to your character sheet trying to figure out a way to resolve whatever it is you're dealing with. Be that attacking a monster or casting a spell to get around a certain difficulty or whatever. We're getting ready to play Pathfinder campaign coming up, and I am enjoying that. But there's a lot of bookkeeping that's going on into to making that campaign work, and the rules in that they interact with the fiction in a very different way. They make the fiction accord with how the rules work, whereas I feel like what I would like is for the rules to support the fiction and to focus more on just the story. So this happened to be released, and again, as I said, like I had just finished binge watching through Band of Brothers and the Pacific, so I've been really thinking about that kind of military campaign and the character death and stuff like that, and ways of still telling the story with character death in a very still a fun and engaging way. It's difficult in a game like Pathfinder or Shadow the Demon Lord or Traveler because you're losing the character, whereas this seems to really everyone's got to be prepared for the character to die. They possibly could. This is a very, very dangerous world, and they're engaged in perhaps the most dangerous activity against the most devastatingly dangerous, I keep using dangerous, devastatingly lethal adversary, and you've got the other added sort of story thing of when you lose those characters, they may come back. They can come back as undead and threaten your heroes. There's nothing to prevent you from, if you're playing a campaign where one of your allies that makes a heroic last stand and decides to blow the bridge and stay behind so that they can they can stand against the adversaries and the rest of the squad can get away. Well, that adversary may be corrupted by the blight or by the blighter and then come back as some kind of alchemical horror to be used against their allies, and that kind of stuff, that where whatever's happening in the game builds on it, and a character may not leave the story just because he's not being played by a player anymore. That's awesome. Like, I think that's really cool, and it makes for a really memorable experience. Like I mentioned that this is something I was choked that I couldn't get it to the table, because if I had my players available tonight, I would have been playing this rather than doing a review of it. It seems like such an intriguing concept, and I love how many ways that the players get interesting mechanical decisions to make that are story related. The needs of the quartermaster and how they're spending their resources relates to the missions you go on. If you're running short on supplies, like you need to have food. If you're out of food, your morale takes a hit every time that you have to feed someone, and you don't have food available. You need horses. Horses can be used to outrun or to reduce the chance of pressure. So it's you moving away, sort of like riding off the distance as the undead army comes marching in. But every decision you make means that you're not making certain other decisions, and when you don't make certain decisions, it's bad, right? And or it's bad for the army. And one final thing I'll mention too is the way that the game interacts with or plays downtimes too. So in every kind of movie or film, like Saving Private Ryan or the Band of Brothers or Pacific, there's always those down times, those times when they're not involved in the mission, they're not involved in the planning, those quiet moments back in camp. They have those in this game as well, and it's either the DM or the lore master who sort of dictates those. Where the heck is it? Sorry, I'm trying to find the sheet that has it. I believe that is on. Not on this one. I think no, it is. Sorry, I thought it'd be super clever to fold up all of these things, and then what it's made is it's made some of these difficult to encounter. So what there is for back at camp, there's different scenes that you play through. So there's when your morale is high, and it's dictated to where your morale score is. And these are examples like, when your morale is high, a soldiers hold a remembrance for the fallen, or a young soldier, or the storms darken the skies, rumors and wild speculations spread. And then when morale's low, a bunch of Legion medical supplies are missing, and the wounded cry, or screams can be heard in the distance at all hours, preventing any rest. So what that gives you an opportunity to do is sort of zoom in on your playbook characters. So not the roles, not the generals, but back on the soldiers themselves in their quiet moments, and then play through some things. And you're free to do other, like, you can have downtime actions that happen there, or like research actions or things like that, and a lot of those will relate to where you are too. If you're deep in the primordial forest, what you're doing in those quiet moments is probably going to be different than, say, when you're in a city where you fought this brutal retreating action, and then you get to a city where they're not even aware that the conflict is really going on, and that's one of the places that you stop off in the course of the campaign, and that's just awesome. Like I can just imagine the great role-playing opportunities you'd have there, and then because the game, every result of the dice always adds to the fiction, whether it's a good one or a bad one, it gives you lots of opportunity to be very creative and weave a really intriguing story for these characters who are very, who may feel very, very doomed as well too. Like it has that sort of fatalistic, God, we're going to fail kind of faith feeling to it. And one last thing too is if you really want to treat it like a proper like game type game, there's a score sheet. You can score how well you did. Now, it doesn't, what you scored in at least the quick start does not really have any other effect. It just gives you a number to work with. But what they've indicated is that when you get the full game, or when you get the expansion, what that'll do is it'll tell you what your starting point is for the next campaign. And that's awesome. Like that's so cool that you've got one that feeds right into the next story. And as you have probably picked up, like the story itself is the story of the Legion. It's not really like we do get in a broader, arc of the story or of the campaign. What the plot and the moments and whatever else that unfolds is all about it's all little stories that fit into the overall arcing story of the Legion. And that's the thing that everyone shares, in the same way that in Blades in the Dark, everyone shares a gang. The players all share the Legion. They just play different, roles in it, both at the senior level down to the junior level. And that just sounds amazing to me. Like that is so fucking cool. And I particularly love that there's a fixed campaign to play through. One of the things I've come to appreciate recently with Shadow of the Demon Lord is the idea of a fixed term campaign. There's a beginning, there's an ending. I think a lot of I'd even go so far to say as most campaigns, especially D&D type things, you want to keep playing. You're going to keep playing your character until the campaign kind of dies out a natural death. But it's great to see a game that just says, look, this is what this whole story is about. You know, we're starting with this catastrophic loss, and we're going to follow through the story of you struggling to try and make this, you know, unbelievable victory, to draw, you know, where everything looks like it's going to be against you, to turn that all those trials and tribulations into success and protect the lands of men and drive back the Cinder King, who took so much from you and from your brothers and sisters and from the Legion itself before our story kicked off. And I guess that, you know, linking back to the name of the thing, that sort of fits thematically, right? Like that, whatever it is, the St. Crispin's Day speech. That's what that's all about, right? It's that you know, standing side by side in something that would be remembered as a turning point in history, and knowing that you're going to be participating in that. That's, I think, the exciting bit of this campaign, of this game, is just the crazy, brutal stakes of it, the ways that you get really invested. I think in your, I can see you getting invested in your characters. That would be as badass as that moment in World War Z, where, you know, 7 years after this catastrophic defeat, the heroes are making their stand to the sound of Iron Maiden's "The Trooper," and that's, in my mind, what's so compelling about this, the concept for this game, and the execution looks to be extraordinary. I really can't wait to get it to the table. So, if any or all of this sounds interesting to you, I have included a link to the Drive-Thru RPG page where you can purchase this. It's pretty cheap as well too. It is just the early access right now, but the early access is really a huge amount. Like, you get 97 pages of rules and the specialized missions for each of those areas that I mentioned before. And I'll hold up the map one more time and fuss with the camera just so you can see what I'm talking about here. So, like, because there's a lot of story to go through here. You know, like, look at every one of those locations has some very, not only will you be doing those random missions that will tie into wherever, you know, whatever's going on at those different places. In addition, there's at least a minimum of 3 specialized missions. So, but I mean, again, like, you're very much encouraged to go where you want with things in this. Like, you have an enormous amount of freedom to tell whatever story you want. But, like, just take a look at that. Like, that's, you know, crazy amount of just alone the specialized missions, and each of the locations is extremely unique and has some really very cool, evocative things that just spurn your imagination. Like, I've read through all of these, and every single location, I was like, oh my god, I could do this, and oh my god, I could do that, and that's just amazing. So anyway, as you can tell, I'm extremely enthusiastic about this game. I will do a follow-up review once I've actually had a chance to get this to the table to let you know what I think. But I would suspect that my reaction is going to be overwhelmingly positive. I really, really loved Blades in the Dark, and I don't want to compare one to the other necessarily, but for me personally, where I was at and where I'm sort of what I'm looking to, the things that I was looking for in a game, something with a more, you know, brutal and sort of like bloody sort of body count, something that's got a more fixed term campaign, something that it focuses more on story than on just the mechanics, but also provides some really interesting mechanic stuff. Something that forces the players to operate as a team. Like, all of that stuff is exactly what I have been sort of looking for. So I really, really cannot wait to get this. And I'm even more excited to get this to the table than I am Blades in the Dark at this point, just because of where I'm at and what I'm looking for the game. So a huge kudos to the folks who are behind this, Straws and John, I believe. Did I already forget the names? Hold on here. Straws and John, I got it right. Congrats, guys. This game is awesome. I really cannot wait to get it to the table. So, anyway, who is this for? So who this would not be for, I don't think, if your group is not into the idea of a fiction, you know, first game, and I would suggest exposing them to it first. You know, there's some great quick starts that are available for other for free for other similar games. You could give those a try, but I mean, if you absolutely know that your group or at least one or the majority of the group is not going to buy into the idea of, you know, this type of setup for a game, it's just not going to work. You know, like if the setup just doesn't jive and players just cannot get into the game or into the story that way, and they like having their own character they can build and see develop, and that one character interacts with another ongoing story, it's probably not going to be for them. You know, if you like something that's more magic, you know, I got one player in my regular group who loves playing magic users, but he likes fantasy, and this would be a very hard sell for him. There's no magic in this. I think that he'd probably enjoy it if he played it, but just because there's no wizards in this, the setting itself would be a non-starter for him. I don't think that he would really. He might enjoy himself in spite of himself, but it would be a tough sell. But who is it for? Is if you do like Apocalypse World type games. Obviously this is something that's worth checking out. I think people who like narrative tabletop games too, like narrative board games, like maybe what's called like Descent and those kind of things where you're playing like, you know, cooperative dungeons. This would be a pretty natural narrative transition. It's more of a a narrative game, obviously, but there's enough interesting tactical stuff that's making you're making decisions over. You can easily crunch numbers and odds and stuff like that to be like, all right, I need to get X amount of cards to feed these to have enough food to show up in the next place. So we need to do this kind of supply mission and that kind of supply mission and whatever. There's a lot of like not minutia because that makes it sound unfun, but there's a lot of resources to be tracking that players of that kind of thing might transition nicely into this kind of role-playing game. And then also anyone who's a fan of any of the like films or TV shows that I mentioned there, there is also there's a novel series that specifically was called out as a theme, the Black Company series, I think it's called. I never read them, so I can't speak to whether that's this is an accurate depiction, but I mean, this really seems like a really great military role-playing game. You know who actually might enjoy it too is people who enjoyed like the Twilight 2000 games. There are a lot of similar thematic ideas in here, but it's structured in more of a concrete story kind of way. There's still a lot of the same elements of like getting along with the locals and traveling through a devastated land and playing soldiers and tracking resources and stuff like that. But it's obviously a fantasy setting instead of a post-apocalyptic one. But I think that might be something that would appeal to that kind of player. It appeals to me in the same way that Twilight 2000 appeals to it may appeal to someone else too. So yeah, I think that's probably all I've got to say about it. I apologize for the more scattershot nature of this review. It's just, again, like because there's so many interlocking parts, kind of like there's a line out of Sicario where Benicio del Toro, his character says to what's her name's character that oh, you're asking how a watch works. Just keep an eye on the time, and that's kind of like what it's like to try and describe or review this particular game, is because so many of the parts move all at once. It's really hard to just start as a clear, this is what you do in this game without losing out on some of the really great elements. So if I have lost the narrative in this and you've got more questions about this, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll try to respond in a timely fashion and answer your questions as best I can. One thing I haven't linked right now, and I will after I post this, is a link to the Google Plus community, because I know that Strauss is certainly active on that. I've got answers to a couple questions I had on that within like hours of posting, and I know he's responded to several other people's questions, both about the lore and about the mechanics of the game. So if you do have questions and you want to get it from the horse's mouth, as it were, I'd encourage you to go over to the Blaze in the Dark Google Plus community and post your questions there too, if you want to go with a more authoritative source. Yeah, and just in closing, like I have not been this excited about a new game in quite a while. I did get this close to this excited about Blood and Bone, so maybe I should be a little more cautious going into this. But this, I think I'm more confident will play the way I envision it playing, only because Blades in the Dark is a very well play-tested system. It's an incredibly robust engine to be built on, and the themes that they've not twisted but worked that underlying mechanic to do or to service in this particular game is just awesome. I think it's going to make for some really, really exciting and memorable stories as we as I get this sucker to the table. So anyway, thank you as always to those who may be listening. Again, my apologies for more of a rambling review. I guess all my reviews are rambling, so maybe this is a less focused ramble than usual. But thank you as always. I greatly appreciate hearing from anybody who posts on this too. I love knowing that there's more of a dialogue going on in some cases than me just talking to talking to a screen. Of course, if I've screwed anything up in my review, if I've described something wrong, or you feel that you could do a better job of fleshing out something I've done a ham-fisted job of it, in particular the mechanics of Blades in the Dark, please feel free to post something as well too. I'm happy for the folks who are listening to benefit from someone else's superior knowledge if they have that. So anyway, have a terrific long weekend, or not long weekend. Have a terrific weekend. It's wishful thinking on my part. And I'll be back again soon. We did not have a Traveler game this week because I was just very, very busy at work and could not find the time. But this coming week, I think I may be actually on Wednesday getting this sucker to the table. So we may be starting may get a chance to actually have this an actual play session coming up soon. So fingers crossed that that'll happen this Wednesday. If not, then Wednesday will likely be back to either the Rise of the Room team or the Traveler campaign. In about 2.5 weeks' time, we are doing our annual gaming marathon as well too. So on June 23rd, I think, June 23rd, we will be running 2 different sessions, and it is a surprise for my players what we're playing, but it should prove to be a really interesting thing. It will likely be 2 sessions of 8 hours each. So they're going to be marathons in both in the description and in reality, and they've proven to be a lot of fun in the past. So if you do want something with some noise playing in the background on the weekend of the 23rd, please feel free to join us. This year, I'm actually going to try and keep the chat window open so that I can interact with folks as they're watching, because we've seen some success on that in the last little while, but I'm going to try and actually implement that and assign someone to be the person watching the chat so we can all do it. Because unlike my usual sessions, the Gaming Marathon will have all of our usual Friday night players all in one place. So I am very much looking forward to that, both in the terms of having us all in one place to play together, and also to be able to bring you a different style of game. So that's what's coming in the near future. So anyway, have a terrific weekend. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.